2 to 3 months. That's it. After years of development, after sanctions forced a complete redesign, after every foreign component had to be ripped out and replaced with something built entirely at home, Russia's SJ-100 is now this close to certification. 25 flights per month. 176 out of 227 certification flights complete. And the finish line is finally visible. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't just about one aircraft getting certified. This is about whether Russia's entire domestic aviation strategy actually works. Because if the SJ-100 makes it, everything changes. And if it doesn't, the consequences go far deeper than one program. If this kind of real aviation analysis is what you're here for, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Let's get into it. To understand why April 2026 matters so much for the SJ-100, you need to understand what this aircraft went through to get here. The original superjet, the SJ-100, was Russia's first serious attempt at a modern regional jet, designed to compete with Embraer and Bombardier. And honestly, it was ambitious, technically credible, built with genuine intent to compete internationally. But it had a fundamental vulnerability baked into its design from the very beginning. Foreign components everywhere. The engines, a joint development with French manufacturer Safran. Avionics, largely Western. Systems throughout the aircraft, dependent on suppliers from countries that would eventually become adversaries. For years, this wasn't a problem. The supply chain worked. The aircraft flew. Airlines operated it. Then 2022 happened. And overnight, the SJ-100's foreign dependency went from an engineering choice to an existential crisis. Spare parts stopped arriving. Maintenance support became legally complicated. Aircraft that needed component replacements were effectively grounded because the components simply weren't available. The aircraft hadn't failed. The supply chain had. And that's when Russia made a decision that was simultaneously obvious and enormously difficult. Rebuild it from scratch. Every foreign component replaced with a domestic alternative. New engines, new avionics, new systems throughout. Not an upgrade. A complete redesign of everything that mattered. The result is the SJ-100. Same basic airframe, completely different internal architecture, and an entirely new certification requirement. Because replacing this many systems means proving from the beginning that everything works. That certification process is what's now approaching its final phase. Here's something that gets lost in the coverage of aircraft programs. Certification isn't a formality. It isn't a rubber stamp at the end of a development program. It's the most demanding phase of the entire process. And understanding what it actually involves changes how you read the SJ-100's progress numbers. Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency, Rosaviatsia, requires that any new aircraft or any substantially modified aircraft demonstrate compliance with safety and performance standards across an enormous range of conditions and scenarios. That demonstration happens through certification credit flights. Each flight is a structured test, a specific set of conditions, a specific system or performance parameter being evaluated, data recorded, analyzed, documented, results compared against the standard the aircraft must meet. And it's iterative. If a test reveals an issue, the issue gets resolved. The test gets repeated. The data gets reevaluated. Only when compliance is demonstrated does that test get closed. For the SJ-100, 227 certification credit flights are required. As of April 2026, 176 have been completed. That's 77.5% of the required flight test program, with roughly 25 flights being completed per month. Deputy Minister Abramenkov stated at a Federation Council Committee meeting on April 14, 2026, that all certification flights are expected to complete within 2 to 3 months, which puts full flight test completion somewhere around mid-2026. But, and this is the critical detail, completing the flight test program doesn't immediately mean certification. There's one more gate the SJ-100 has to pass through. And it's the one that's been holding everything up. The SJ-100's engine is the PD-8. Domestically developed, domestically produced, designed to replace the Franco-Russian powerjet SAM-146 that powered the original SSJ-100. And here's the situation as of April 2026. Final certification of the SJ-100 depends on the issuance of the type certificate for the PD-8 engine. The aircraft-level certification cannot be completed until the engine it's built around has its own certification finalized. Why does this dependency exist? And why does it matter so much? Because an aircraft certification isn't just about the airframe. It's about the complete system. Airframe, engines, avionics, and all integrated systems performing together within the standards required for commercial operation. You can't certify an aircraft to carry passengers with an engine that hasn't itself been certified. The type certificate for the engine validates that the PD-8 meets all required safety and performance standards as a standalone power plant. Only after that certificate is issued can the final phase of aircraft-level testing proceed. And only after that final phase can Rosaviatia issue the SJ-100's own type certificate. So the critical path looks like this. PD-8 type certificate issued. Then SJ-100 final test phase begins. Then SJ-100 type certificate issued. Then serial deliveries can commence. Rosaviatia previously indicated July 2026 as a target date for the SJ-100 certification. The Ministry of Industry and Trade acknowledges that schedule adjustments are possible. But the baseline target remains 2026. And with 25 flights per month being completed and 51 flights remaining as of mid-April, the math, at least, supports the timeline. The question is whether the PD-8 certification holds to its own schedule, because that's the variable nobody fully controls. While certification testing continues in the air, something equally important is happening on the ground. At the Yakovlev Production Center in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, United Aircraft Corporation's primary civil aircraft manufacturing site, serial production of the SJ-100 is actively underway. And the numbers are significant. 42 aircraft are under contract. 26 of those 42 are currently at various stages of completion on the production line. Of those 26, the first 12 units are in an advanced stage of completion. Why does production happening alongside certification matter so much? Because it means that when the type certificate is issued, there isn't a wait for production to spin up. There isn't a gap between certification and first deliveries. Aircraft are already being built. The pipeline is already flowing. The moment certification clears, deliveries can begin essentially immediately. This parallel approach, building aircraft while certification continues, is a deliberate, calculated strategy. And it's one that carries real risk. What if the certification process requires a design change? What if a regulatory finding, one of the regulator findings that still need to be closed, requires a modification to something that's already been built into those 12 near-complete aircraft? That scenario means rework, potentially expensive rework, on aircraft that are already well advanced in production. It's the unavoidable tension of parallel development and production. The program accepts that risk, because the alternative, waiting for full certification before beginning production, would delay first deliveries by a year or more. And in Russia's current aviation situation, a year of delay carries its own enormous cost. The SJ-100 is the headline story. But there's another Russian certification program that's actually even further along, and it deserves equal attention. The IL-114-300 turboprop regional aircraft has completed its entire flight test campaign. 336 certification credit flights. Done. Not 77. Not 90. Complete. All compliance documentation has been submitted to Rosaviatia. The IL-114-300 is now waiting not for more testing, but for the regulatory process of reviewing and approving the documentation it has already submitted. In certification terms, that's the final administrative stage. The engineering work is done. The flight testing is done. The data is in the hands of the authority. What comes next is review, evaluation, and issuance of the type certificate. For a turboprop regional aircraft designed for Russia's most remote routes, operating into gravel airstrips in Siberia, connecting communities that have no other transport options, this certification represents something beyond a program milestone. It represents the arrival of a domestically produced aircraft that can actually replace the aging foreign-sourced turboprops that sanctions have made increasingly difficult to maintain. The IL-114-300 is, by the available evidence, the closest Russian civil aircraft to receiving its type certificate in 2026. And when it does, it won't just be a certification. It'll be proof, documented, regulatory, undeniable, that Russia can produce a complete regional aircraft, from design through certification, entirely within its own industrial ecosystem. The Russian Ministry of Industry and Trade has stated clearly that certification of Russia's key civil aircraft programs is expected in 2026. 2 programs, 1 year, stakes that go well beyond aviation. Think about what successful certification of both the SJ-100 and IL-114-300 in the same year would actually mean. It would mean Russia has demonstrated the ability to take 2 completely domestically configured aircraft, one a complete redesign of an existing platform, one a revival and modernization of a Soviet-era design, through the full certification process using entirely domestic systems, domestic engines, domestic avionics, domestic supply chains, certified by Russian aviation authorities, ready for commercial operation. That's not just an aviation achievement. That's an industrial statement of the highest order. It says that the forced redesign, the painful years of import substitution, the enormous investment in domestic component development actually worked, and it creates a foundation for everything that follows. The MC-21 certification, the IL-96-400M production, the PD-35 development. All of these programs become more credible, more fundable, more industrially viable if 2026 delivers on its certification promises. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Aviation programs slip. The Ministry of Industry and Trade itself acknowledges that schedule adjustments for the SJ-100 are possible. The PD-8 engine certification is the variable that Russia's aviation establishment cannot fully control through will or investment alone. It will be ready when the engineering says it's ready. And engineering doesn't negotiate with political timelines. 25 flights per month. 176 completed. 51 remaining. 2 to 3 months to the end of the flight test campaign. And then the PD-8 type certificate. And then the final SJ-100 test phase. And then the type certificate that unlocks deliveries of the 12 near-complete aircraft, already waiting on the production line in Komsomolsk-on-Amur. This is the sequence. This is what success looks like, mapped out step by step. And for the first time in years, each step is within reach. Not guaranteed. Never guaranteed in aviation. But genuinely, measurably, documentably within reach. The SJ-100 story is, at its core, a story about what happens when a country is forced to rebuild something it thought it already had. The original SJ-100 worked. It flew, carried passengers. It was commercially operational. And then the supply chain it depended on evaporated. And Russia had to ask itself a question that every nation with aviation ambitions eventually faces. Do you build independence into your industrial capability from the beginning? Or do you discover its absence at the worst possible moment? Russia discovered its absence the hard way. The SJ-100 is the answer to that discovery. Imperfect, still unfinished, still carrying real risks around the PD-8 timeline. But real, advancing at 25 flights per month, 77 complete, and closing fast. Whether it crosses the finish line in July 2026, or slips into the final months of the year. The direction is clear. And for Russian aviation, arriving at that finish line, whenever it comes, will mean something that performance specifications and market comparisons can't fully capture. It will mean the system works on its own, without anyone else's permission, and that, in today's world, might be worth more than any efficiency rating. Do you think the SJ-100 will make its 2026 certification target? Or will the PD-8 push it into 2027? Drop your honest assessment in the comments. And if this level of detailed, honest aviation analysis is what you want more of, subscribe, share this with someone who follows Russian aviation closely, and hit the like button. It genuinely helps. See you in the next one.